What's up, everybody? Welcome to part three of my serial killer series. Today, I'm going to be deciphering the chart of the Night Stalker, aka Richard Ramirez, born on February 28th, 1960 at 2:07 a.m. at El Paso, Texas, or February 29th. Different resources say different things, but today I'm going to look at it on February 28th. But anyways, Richard Ramirez was a serial killer. He was a rapist. He was a burglar. He terrorized people all over Los Angeles, California. He was a stalker, the Night Stalker. He would kill people with different weapons, handguns, machetes, tire irons, and knives, and um, several different things. And his childhood was pretty interesting. He did grow up in an abusive environment. His father was very abusive. He seemed a little crazy himself. He used to beat his kids, and he used to bang his head against the wall. He would get so angry, and he would even abuse himself. And when his mother was pregnant with Richard Ramirez, she was working at a boot factory, and she was inhaling chemicals and fumes without any protection or without any ventilation. And even the children that she had before Richard Ramirez, his older siblings, they had um, uh, brain defects because of that. And with Richard Ramirez, she was so sick that her body was trying to uh, reject the baby while she was pregnant with Richard. And the result of that is that Richard Ramirez had epileptic seizures while growing up. Even when he was a child, he used to play sports. He was very athletic. But the first time he showed his temperament is when he got very upset when the school didn't let him to play football because he would have those random seizures every now and then. So there's quite a few puzzle pieces that added him up to being a serial killer. Um, his father, I mentioned earlier, he was abusive. He used to even hurt himself with a hammer, and his mother had to move away from him because he was so abusive. And he had a teacher that used to come inside the home and teach him and his brother. I think it was homeschooling or something like that. And Richard Ramirez won't admit it, but it is speculated that he was molested by this teacher. His older brother was molested by this teacher. That is a fact. And I do believe Richard Ramirez was molested. You know, most heterosexual men, won't admit if they were molested by a man who was a male teacher. And that is something that I do believe that happened to him. And even at a certain age, right at the point where he was going through puberty, he had a cousin who was also crazy, and he was a heavy influence on Richard Ramirez. His cousin was in the Vietnam War, and he used to kill Vietnam women. He would rape them, abuse them, and videotape them and show it to Richard Ramirez. And Richard Ramirez was very influenced by this person. And so he would teach him how to use weapons. He would teach him how to use guns and knives, and uh, showing him videos of his cousin raping and abusing Vietnam women. So it's interesting that would happen at that point in his life, because that's when you start um, having interest in women and sex. So that does have an influence on his mindset, incorporating violence with sexual desires. And when he was living with his cousin murdered his wife in front of Richard Ramirez. He shot a gun to her head and pretty much blew her head off with the gun. And Richard Ramirez seen that at a very young age. And as time went on, when he was a teenager, he did have sexual fantasies about women and torturing women. Like his cousin influenced him to be that way. And at the same time, he was taking drugs and smoking, sniffing glue, and all kinds of weird, strange things, and listening to dark, heavy metal music, very dark stuff. He eventually became a devil worshiper, and he just had he had a belief system where he felt like everyone has an evil side and a dark side, and he just acted it out. And this is something that he admitted to the authorities, where he said, and I quote him saying, "We are evil. We are all evil." This is something that Richard Ramirez has said to the police and to the authorities. Uh, this is an indication that he does have unusual, strange philosophies. He does have challenging aspects between Pisces and Sagittarius. Pisces, can be delusional on the negative side, and Sagittarius is a sign of uh, being overly optimistic about something, or having being dogmatic about their beliefs. Those can be the negative qualities of Sagittarius sometimes. And Pisces, when it's manifested in a negative way, they can be elusive to their behavior, or they'll admit things in a very vague, offhand way. And then when you corner them or question them, they can be vague and dismissive, where they don't flat out admit to their doings or their lies or their deceptive behavior, or they can be indirect in their answer sometimes. This is when Pisces is being manifested in a negative way with certain planets, certain conjunctions, or whatever the case is. They give vague, unclear answers when they don't want to admit something about themselves. They may give poetic responses, or they may give some kind of condescending, dismissive response, whether it's them kind of laughing at your question, not giving a clear, direct answer. But if you really want to push them and corner them, they maybe even just become speechless. And those are some of the qualities that I've seen in Richard Ramirez. He does have a stellium in Pisces. And again, this is not me bashing the zodiac sign Pisces. I look at zodiac signs in a very objective way. There's negative and positives to all 12 zodiac signs, so I'm not hating on Pisces, because Pisces can be manifested in a beautiful, positive way, whether they're very creative and artistic and into music and very spiritual people, very loving people. But the reason why Pisces can be described in a negative way, being deceptive or even straight up liars, is because Pisces is a very vulnerable, sensitive zodiac sign. It's a water sign. And out of all the three water signs, which is Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, Pisces is the most vulnerable one. And the reason why that is because they have nothing to protect themselves. Like Cancer has the hard shell. So Cancer people, they can be guarded, or they have a tough exterior. They know how to put a wall around them. In Scorpio, they have the stinger behind them. They can be very intense and to the point where it causes paranoia. That defense turns into the offense sometimes, because they're so guarded because of all the turbulence and the trauma that has happened in their lives. So they can be defensive, and they're always ready to strike you, basically, with their little stingers behind them. The Pisces has nothing to protect itself. So the only way they know how to protect themselves is by hiding, lying, even running sometimes, because Pisces rules the feet, disappearing. They can be escapists sometimes. And, it's kind of like, just think of the ocean, those water animals where they change into different colors. Pisces is a mutable sign, so they can adjust to different situations. So in a negative way, in Richard Ramirez's case, that was the case. The reason why it was so hard to catch him, because the way he murdered people was inconsistent, using different weapons, different ways of killing people. And all the mutable signs seem to have a high rate in serial killing. That is something that was asked to me. I forgot who asked me that. Somebody asked me, why is it the mutable signs have the highest rate in serial killing? And I think all 12 signs do have the potential to be killers. But the reason why I think mutable signs have a higher rate as far as serial killing goes is because it's easy for them to get away with stuff. Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius, and Pisces, they are mutable signs, so they have a better chance of getting away with murder. All 12 signs have the potential to be murderers, but The cardinal signs like Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, they may start something, but they may not finish it, or they leave evidence behind. And the fixed signs, Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius, it's a fixed sign. So they're the stubborn ones. They have a consistency, so they're easier to find. I've seen serial killers with all 12 signs playing out into their personalities and their charts, but they always get caught. Whereas the mutable signs like Ted Bundy and uh, Jeffrey Dahmer, Rich Ramirez, they're harder to catch. Like Ted Bundy, he has a stellium in Sagittarius, the sign of long distance travel. He traveled all over the United States, killing and raping women. But what gave him away is the fixed energy that he had in him. He had Saturn and Pluto in Leo, a fixed sign, making a square aspect to Jupiter in Scorpio, and Venus and Mercury in Scorpio. And Venus represents women. And the women that he killed, they were the same kind of women. He was attracted to the same kind of women because it's a fixed sign, Venus and Scorpio, making a challenging aspect to Saturn, which makes him being kind of picky when it comes towards women. Pluto giving a stalkerish behavior, so that's why Ted Bundy got caught. So, same thing with Richard Ramirez. He has a stellium in Pisces and causing a lot of confusion and being deceptive and hiding. And he slept in graveyards, hiding in the dark, hiding in the night. That's how he was able to get away with his murders. So let's take a look at Richard Ramirez's birth chart. I'm gonna share the screen really quick. Oof, look at this. All right. So let's look at what's going on down here. His sun and his moon. He has a moon-Mercury conjunction along with K2. Now, remember what I said in the other videos that Moon and Mercury always seem to play a part when it comes to a person's thought process, when it comes to killing, because Mercury represents our logical, rational mind, and Moon represents our emotions and our feelings and how we perceive things. And Mercury Moon conjunction can be a very tricky conjunction. You really have to look at a conjunction like this with a microscope, because Mercury Moon conjunction people, they can be highly imaginative and very, very sensitive, because Mercury represents our nerves and our nervous system, and Moon sensitizes that because Moon represents our sensitivity. So the way Mercury Moon people perceive things, can be a little off. They can have an overactive imagination, especially when it's in the zodiac sign like Pisces. Pisces is a sign of imagination. So this can cause some psychological disorder. Mercury Moon people, they can have psychological disorder when when it has bad aspects to it, or in conjunction with malefic planets like K2. This is the South Node K2 right here. So whenever somebody has a Mercury Moon conjunction, the question is always, how do they perceive reality? Because they can either be really friendly and jovial and kind of happy-go-lucky, very intelligent and perceptive. And, it's a good combination for someone who wants to go into counseling, psychology. They're really good at analyzing people. It can make the mind extremely analytical and perceptive. And it's a good combination for someone who wants to be a writer, or someone who is into, they do call this a healing yoga. So it's good for someone who wants to go into a healing field, because it brings a mental understandings of other people's emotions and feelings. However, because of this South Node conjunction, the South Node is very malefic. You see how it's shaped like an empty glass. So it's kind of like wherever K2 is where you feel empty in life. And also letting go of something and giving up on something. And Moon represents emotional happiness. and it's in the fourth house, and the fourth house represents happiness, and it's in the sign of Pisces, which represents unconditional love. And one of the things that Richard Ramirez used to say was that I give up on love, I give up on emotional happiness. Those are one of the things that he said several times throughout his lifetime. That's what the South Node did. It's imploding energy of letting go of something in a very destructive way, which is emotional happiness, and with Mercury here, also rationale and logic. So there's definitely an emotional detachment here with K2 here, conjuncting Mercury and Moon. And by Moon and Mercury representing our mind and the zodiac sign of Pisces, the mind may have a tendency to get lost into their fantasy world and music and stuff like that. And in his case, it was dark music, with the South Node here. And also, Moon is ruled by the eighth house. Moon is ruled by Cancer, Cancer sitting in the house of life and death and transformation. So the rule of the eighth house is in the fourth house, conjuncting these two planets, Mercury and K2 here. And K2 representing isolation and detachment. So there's a detachment from family and, parents with sun here and moon here, and the fourth house representing family altogether, and friends, because Mercury can represent our friends. Detachment from logic and reason. And Mercury is not strong here. It's actually debilitated in Pisces. So he can be make a person very vague in their communication purposely, because that's what Richard Ramirez would do, communicating in a very vague way to the authorities. And it could even cause a bit of a moodiness with Moon here, and never being clear on what his motives were and giving off innuendos and stuff like that. And also, these planets together can give bipolar tendencies and also be emotionally explosive. And by the fact that it's in the zodiac sign of Pisces, can make the mind get lost into their fantasy world, because Pisces doesn't deal with reality. It likes to get lost into their imaginative spiritual world. And K2 does represent the dragon's tail, and Rahu represents the dragon's head. So there's no body in the middle. So it's kind of like the tail of a dragon. So there's no head here, meaning like there's no logic. And with Mercury Moon here, which is inflicting the mind, so there may have dreams of headless people. And he did decapitate people. So I don't know if that has something to do with that. So I don't know if there's some kind of connection with that, because he did slit people's throats in the privacy of people's home, fourth house, privacy of home. Mercury being ruled by Gemini, and Gemini's right here, seventh house, other people, the rule of the seventh house, into the fourth house, being invasive in other people's home environment, and Moon being ruled by the eighth house, which is occult and hidden knowledge, and Moon representing our emotional happiness. So his emotional happiness would be getting into or having a mental understanding of life and death situations, or having an interest in taboo topics, and having mystical things being revealed to him in the privacy of his home, which is what happened. His cousin teaching him very dark things. And Mercury can represent our siblings, and that's including cousins to a certain degree. So Mercury can represent that to a certain level. So you can see the psychological issues being brought into his mind and into the home environment. And then you have the sun here, which represents the father, being challengingly aspected by Pluto, which can, to a certain degree, represents abuse, and it's making an opposition to the sun. And Pluto always destroys the ego of wherever it stands. So Pluto aspect in the sun, there can be fear and anxiety of the life being destroyed, or fear of abuse, because his father was very abusive within the family. And 10th house represents father figures, and the sun represents fatherly figures. So there is a polarity here with Pluto and sun causing fear of abuse and being controlled by other people. So that defensive nature turns into being on the offense, being destructive and abusive towards other people. And the sun is ruled by Leo. Leo sitting in the ninth house. And the ninth house represents a teacher. So the rule of the ninth house into the fourth house. And he did have a teacher that came into his home and sexually abused him and his siblings, because Sun is not only just ruled by the ninth house, but it's being aspected by Pluto, which can represent power, control, dominance, and abuse. And with Sun being in the fourth house, it does show that all of these things that happened to him regarding his father, his teacher, having a psychological effect on his mind. Even though Sun is not in a close conjunction with these three planets, it's still in the same house. So it definitely had a psychological effect on his mind. And then with Uranus being in the ninth house, you can have a strange or weird, unorthodox beliefs, which is something that Richard Ramirez had. And it does have an aspect from Venus in opposition. So encountering strange and unusual relationships. And it can bring inconsistency when it comes to relationship with women. So bouncing from one woman to the next, raping and killing them. And then there's a Mars conjunction as well. So he's very impulsive and aggressive when it came to his approach to women, just like Jeffrey Dahmer, where he had Mars in the seventh house. So this can give a similar result of that, being dominant and aggressive and strange and unusual with the Uranus opposition. And it's making a challenging square aspect to Neptune. So square aspect from Uranus to Neptune to Venus. So I'm also being very delusional, because Neptune does represent delusions, and Neptune is in the 12th house, which represents isolation and sleep. And Neptune is making a challenging square aspect to Uranus, which causes weird sleep patterns. And he did have a strange sleep pattern by sleeping in the daytime and staying awake at night and sleeping in graveyards and stuff like that. Scorpio does rule graveyards, so there's definitely a weird connection to his sleep patterns, with Uranus making a square aspect to Neptune. And the sun does represent where we are confident, and so basically, people who are born at night, they feel more alive during the nighttime rather than the daytime. And also the result of that, just in general, they receive recognition later on in life, as opposed to a person who's as opposed to receiving recognition early on in life. And also with Mars being here in the third house, can bring skills and weaponry, because Mars represents weapons and aggression, and it's ruled by the 12th house and the fifth house, Mars being ruled by Aries. And the fifth house represents sports and education. So being educated onto having skills with weaponry, which is what he had. His cousin taught him how to use weapons, knives, guns, and which makes a lot of sense because it's in a scientific sign, Aquarius, which represents things that are trending, things that are scientific. So weaponry and anything that is scientific, anything that is explosive, shocking, because Aquarius can be an unpredictable sign. And so it's in the third house of skills, skills with your hands, knowing how to use weapons. And it's in conjunction with Venus. So being very aggressive towards women, and his skills when it came to weaponry. And another thing about Mars and Venus conjunction right here, it can make a person, magnetic when it comes to women. And strangely enough, he did have women being very attracted to him, despite the fact that he was a psycho serial killer. And which I find kind of weird, but it does make a person, kind of magnetic when it comes to women. And it is making a challenging aspect to Uranus. So attracting strange women, educated women, intelligent women. And, despite his record, women were still attracted to him. And he even had some kind of, he attracted women who were competitive to be with him. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that he has Jupiter right here in the first house, which you can attract other people that see you as like a guru or some kind of leader or something like that. And that's the energy he gave off to other people because it's Jupiter is aspecting the seventh house, which represents other people. So not only do women see him as someone who is like, husband material, despite his behavior, this conjunction does make him appear to be charming and sexually magnetic. In Mars and Venus conjunction, people who have this, they can experience some type of violence when it comes to relationships, or the person can be very dominating in relationships, which he was, very assertive and very aggressive. And then he has a challenging square aspect from Neptune, which can make him um, deceptive in relationships, or he could attract a delusional women, which was very much the case, in my opinion. Now, I was watching an interview about Richard Ramirez where he was supposedly born under the devil degree. And it's one of these planets here. And I have done research on degrees and I have not seen that. But there is an interview out there where an astrologist said that he was born under the degree of the devil. So it's one of these four planets here. She did point in this direction, and I don't know which one it is, but one of these degrees is supposed to be the degree of the devil, and he was a devil worshiper. And Moon is ruled by the eighth house, so that does have a lot to do with the occultism interest that he had. And his ascendant degree, the 22nd degree, um, to kill or to be killed. Of course, he was the one who killed. And this ascendant is at a fixed star. And supposedly, this fixed star causes the person to, well, the person is more prone to take drugs, hallucinatory drugs. And then he has Neptune at another fixed star called a crux, where the person has interest in occult studies, especially by being in the sign of Scorpio, and also have strange, unusual religious beliefs towards dark, mystical things. And also, one more thing down here, back to his moon again. His moon is under a nakshatra. By the way, you can't see the fixed stars or any nakshatras on this chart I'm looking at, but his moon is under a nakshatra called Uttarabhadra. And when the moon is under that particular nakshatra, the person can be very drawn to mystical things, taboo things, the dark side of life, and being drawn to dark music and gothic things. So his mind is very much into um, taboo things. He did have an obsession with um, being a leader for the devil. He prayed to the devil. He believed that the devil created music in heaven, and Pisces does represent music. And then it's under the nakshatra, which causes dark thoughts, and it's also ruled by the eighth house, which is the house of life and death and occultism, in conjunction with Mercury, which brings intelligence and curiosity and mental interest. And on top of that, it's making a challenging square aspect to Jupiter, which represents our religious belief system. So all of that stuff, molded him into him being the crazy person that he was. He definitely has unusual conjunctions and specific placements that made him out to be the way that he was. Mars and Venus, together, making him aggressive and impulsive when it came to women. It's in the third house of neighborhoods or local surroundings. So he was very pushy when it came to approaching women. And he had skills in weaponry, obviously. His mind is being afflicted, with Mercury moon conjunction with K2 and the sun opposing Pluto, which can cause dominating behavior and other challenging aspects from Uranus to Neptune to Venus. So it's all kinds of stuff going on here. So I'm going to take the screen off now. So that is the end of my analysis on Richard Ramirez. I hope you guys found that interesting. And again, I'm going to keep saying this over and over again. I don't discriminate to any of the 12 zodiac signs. And like I said, it is the planetary aspects and conjunctions and the patterns that are in a chart that bring out the negative qualities of the zodiac sign. So anyways, I just wanted to say that again really quickly. And if you guys have any questions in the comments, just put them down and I'll answer them the best that I can. Or if you want me to do another video on another psychopath, or if you want me to do something different or something like that, let me know. Or we could do something that's a little more fun, maybe we could talk about what your personal experience is with certain zodiac signs, or what are the worst traits of each zodiac sign. I think that would be interesting. Maybe I'll make a video on something like that. What brings out the worst part of Aries, the worst part of Taurus, and so on and so on. So anyways, this is the end of my video. Hope you guys have a good night. Bye.